So, hello, this is David Sealey from CACI. I am the Director of Strategy and Growth at CACI. We were meant to be having an event on the 1st of April called the Next Digital Decade. Unfortunately, that event is not going to be happening anymore whilst we all social distance or self-isolate. But we still wanted to get the content that we were going to be discussing at the event out to people. And so today I'm joined by Faye Dineen, who was going to be one of our speakers at the event. She's going to be the first interview we do in a series of interviews with the speakers from the day. And we're going to have Faye talk through what she was going to be covering at the event. So Faye, let me hand over to you to introduce yourself. Do you want to talk through who you are, what you do at CACI?
Sure. So, like David mentioned, I'm Faye Dineen and I head up the digital consulting team at CACI. So our team is focused on ensuring that our clients achieve their targets through the optimization of their digital strategy. And those targets may be acquisition related, retention related, or even experience. And we work across all sorts of industries. So that means our work is really varied. At the moment, we've got work with a national broadcast publisher where we're looking at their customer experience and we're trying to quantify what optimization opportunities could mean to their business. And for another client, we're evaluating their attribution modeling, analysing the true incrementality of their digital spend so that they can really prove the worth of digital marketing to their business and optimise spend across each channel. So very varied, but quite a nice dynamic team working across all sorts of client challenges.
Brilliant. What were you doing before you came to CACI, Faye?
So before that, my background is predominantly within CRM. So I worked across a lot of personalized product companies. So I actually went to a couple of different competitors. And in my last role, I was working in an incubator. So we were buying and starting startup businesses. So although I was predominantly CRM, you wear many hats in that kind of environment. So had a lot of experience with trading, with product development, branding, the whole spectrum, really.
Amazing. Okay, good experience to have. So you're going to be speaking at the event. You're going to be the opening speaker, and obviously it's a shame that it's not happening now. But what was it you were going to be talking to people about? What was your subject or topic?
Well, I was going to be speaking really kind of at the start of the event and explaining the theme of the event and really focusing on what the next digital decade could look like, but also taking a look back. And the theme was all about the concept of a digital marketing hype cycle. So Gartner are an American research company, and they created this concept of a hype cycle, and it graphically presents the maturity and adoption of technologies. So they have time along one axis, expectation along another, and they demonstrate using a curve how at the beginning of a new technology, the expectations may be quite low, that could skyrocket, quickly decline and then eventually plateau. So Gartner defined these stages, there's 5 of them. The first being that kind of innovation trigger. So this is where you look to see what new technologies might be on the horizon. They're typically startup companies, expensive, but early adopters may be willing to take a risk and that may pay off, it may not. So when you look to the next digital decade, Gartner are kind of looking at blockchain for advertising in that space. And then technologies typically see a peak of inflated expectations. So there might be a lot of hype. There might have been like 1 or 2 success stories from early adopters. And at this period, you might see things like conversational marketing. But then typically we see a trough of disillusionment. So you might see some negative press here. You might see a couple of suppliers fail, but then those suppliers that remain are strong. They continue to improve their products. And in this space, we're looking at people, providers that are focused on things like multi-touch attribution. You know, that's kind of come through the innovation phase. There's been a peak, and now we're seeing a reduced number of suppliers that are really focusing on their offering. This leads into the slope of enlightenment, where you kind of see a lot more best practices and the use case of a technology is widely understood. And here we're looking at things like mobile marketing analytics, so the likes of Tune or AppsFlyer. And then finally, you kind of plateau of productivity, just mainstream adoption. Technologies have proved their worth and application. So what I was hoping to talk about at the event was this concept of the hype cycle, and using what Gartner have predicted along with our own channel predictions to kind of speculate what the next digital decade could look like, but also taking a chance to look at the previous decade to call out what was successful and what wasn't so successful last decade.
Yeah. And is there a risk then that marketers may pick trends that are very hyped and very popular, and those are the wrong things to pursue?
Absolutely. I think you have to kind of accept that when something new is on the market, there's going to be a lot of intrigue and interest, and the suppliers have it in their best interest to kind of maximize that. So they're going to be focusing on all these kind of amazing potential things that their technology could do. And it is quite easy to be brought up into that. But as a business, you have to kind of assess how risk averse we are. Are we going to buy into this? And from a technology point of view, that's often very costly. From a channel point of view, less so. So if there's a new channel that's released, you can, with minimal cost, do a proof of concept typically and assess whether it works for your business. But when a technology is involved, it is a risky play to kind of be getting involved at this innovation trigger or peak of inflated expectation stages.
Okay, and the risk is, I guess, that you put resources, time, money into something that then doesn't deliver value for you as a business. Okay, good. So it's important you get that decision point right, or that you test things in the right way. I mean, perhaps bring this to life for us a bit. What changes have you seen in your career of things moving along the hype cycle?
I think when you look back at the 2010s, there was some huge transformations. I mean, if you think about the first one that comes to mind for me is mobile. The first iPhone was released in 2007, I think, with the App Store the year after. So by the time the last decade, we really saw that huge change, you know. Marketing search overtook desktop search. We saw apps massively grow. I think now apps are accounting for 83% of mobile screen time in the UK. 83% is huge. Only 17% of the time on your mobile is actually on a web browser compared to an app. So that has massively changed the way that digital marketers can reach their customers and speak to their customers. Similarly, what came with that was, of course, the rise of social. So Instagram, I think, was actually in 2010 and Snapchat a couple of years later. So if you think we didn't even have Instagram until the start of the last decade, and not only did we see organic social be a huge piece for brands in terms of brand awareness, brand presence, but paid social is just a huge opportunity for digital marketers. Thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds were invested in that straight away. And now that's, of course, $1 billion industry. So I think we've seen that peak. And of course, we've seen different social platforms drop off. Do you remember Vine? That was huge at one point. Everyone thought that was the next big thing.
That's the short videos, wasn't it?
Short videos, yes, of course. The concept's not going away. You've got TikTok now, but you know, social especially, you see that kind of peak and trough. And of course, with that becomes your influencers, your user-generated content, all of that good stuff. I would say other key things, of course, are the cookie. And now we're kind of coming through, we're going through a hype cycle with the cookie, because of course the future of that is very much in doubt. But that drove for the first time behavioral targeting, personalization. Those were things that were really difficult to execute online prior to the cookie. And it means that we've been able to do web analytics, and we were able to do attribution. Without that, performance marketing wasn't really as accountable as it is now. There's so many other things. There's also technology. If you think MarTech now is a huge industry, but you saw in the last decade the growth of the so-called clouds. So your Adobe, your Salesforce, Oracle, IBM, they made so many acquisitions in the last decade. And that really brought up the question of, do we go with multiple specialist vendors, or do we choose a single vendor which offers us all these kind of promises about, this peak of inflated expectation comes up because previously in the last decade, these marketing clouds, they just acquired all these different suppliers, so they weren't as integrated as they were potentially promising. Now we of course see a lot better integration between those platforms within each cloud provider.
Yeah. So we look at some of those trends like mobility and smartphones and the use of apps. We talk about cloud and the nature of marketing clouds and cloud computing, the power that gives us now. Also thinking about social media and how important that is in all of our lives. And now social media is helping elections be determined or influenced. Have there been any trends that have failed to deliver? So those were all ones that have come out quite well, and we now look at them as just being part of our life and normal. What hasn't come through?
So for me, I think there are a couple of things that I immediately think of. And it's almost a bit nostalgic. So there's QR codes and wearable glasses. Do you remember QR codes?
Yeah.
Huge hype around those. A lot of people were trying to figure out how can we utilize this, and the concept was great. The concept was very valid about bridging online and offline. But now I would struggle to tell you of clients that are successfully using QR codes for marketing purposes. And I think it just meant that at the time, the concept was strong, but the technology just wasn't there. I mean, they were released at the start of the decade when, smartphones, yes, they were around, but, mobile connectivity wasn't the strongest. There wasn't inbuilt apps that could actually scan the code. So it was quite a complicated journey to try and understand what to even do with the codes. And then the second, wearable glasses. I mean, Google Glass was built up so much investment, so much marketing, and then Snapchat did their spectacles, both completely flopped. I don't think I've actually ever seen someone wearing those outside of a Google or a Snapchat employee.
Yeah.
And I don't think their concept is going to go away. I think wearable, if anything, is only going to grow in the next decade. But at the time, the technology just wasn't there. And I think that's a lesson we can learn. A lot of the time, these innovation technologies have a sound concept, but unless the technology is there and unless the market is ready to embrace them, they're just not going to succeed.
Yeah, correct. I mean, we've seen wearables, I guess, take off in mobile phone watches. So the Apple Watch is a great example of where it's landed well. But you're right, the wearable glasses are a massive flop. Wonder if they'll pick up back up again. The other thing that you reminded me of with QR codes was beacons. There was a lot of hype around beacons and how we could put them into stores and use that to track people's movements and when they were close to certain clothing or products, and then serving in the moment marketing to that person. But those have disappeared entirely, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, I think a lot of those things, again, the concept is very sound, and this isn't necessarily a technology piece, but a data protection piece. And I think you've got to keep in mind that there might be a great idea, but the external factors at play will impact how well that is going to take off.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of changing tack from things that haven't played out to what you see today. You're in a very fortunate position in that you get to go and work with lots of different organizations and speak to lots of marketing leaders. What trends are people getting on board with at the moment? What are marketers excited about right now?
So I think we're coming into the stage at the moment, one of the technologies that has had murmurings for quite a while and is kind of coming into play a little bit now are customer data platforms, so CDPs. Quite a few of our clients are actually investing, or at least looking into the potential opportunities for them with regards to implementing a CDP. Now, that is no small task, and it's a lot of work. I think, well, just to take a step back, so a CDP is a system that ultimately collates and unifies your customer data from all sorts of sources, including marketing channels. And it has a lot of the providers anyway had that additional promise of enabling customer data modeling and cross-channel campaign execution in a much more user-friendly manner than your typical clouds are trying to do. And, you know, Gartner are looking at these. They've just come off the peak of inflated expectation. Adoption is expanding. But what we're seeing is that there's a risk that the potential of a CDP isn't going to be realised in order to drive that incremental benefit. It's not supposed to be brought in as purely a customer management platform or a CRM system replacement. And we're working with clients at the moment to make sure that once they've implemented a CDP, of course, the implementation, getting that right is critical, but then also how are they harnessing the power of that tool to go above and beyond what they were previously doing?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's definitely one area, I think, if you look at the clients we're working with at the minute that they're working on. And I think another is definitely, we've had a few conversations about, well, what about conversational marketing technology and chatbots? And, you know, a chatbot is all about mimicking human speech to simulate a conversation with a real person. And in theory, that can mean mass customer support automatically and at scale. And especially if you think about what's happening right now with the coronavirus, we have clients who are having to close their call centres down. And, you know, managing that and the negative impact that can have on your customer experience, it's causing a lot of people to kind of think about, well, how else can we have this one-to-one communication with a customer? And I think, you know, from a customer point of view, our expectations are only increasing. You know, we kind of want real-time responses. We want to be able to self-help if we need to. And then from a business side, virtual help is obviously a lot cheaper. Like I mentioned with the coronavirus context, you might be forced to be able to adapt to how you support your customers. But, you know, there's a real risk with also getting that wrong. Customers, it's very, you know, that you still want to feel like you've got a relationship with someone and you're not speaking to an Autobot. You know, you want to have that, you've really got to get it right in terms of mimicking natural language and having that sense of identity still. And I think that's something that, you know, takes a lot of investment to get right.
Yeah, it really does, doesn't it? Okay, yeah, so conversational marketing and customer data platforms, two big areas. Have there been any other trends that have come out? So things like voice and in-housing digital channels are certainly things I hear clients talking about from time to time.
So many, so many. I think, you know, voice especially. So if you look at, this is definitely kind of in its hype phase. I think how you harness voice for driving marketing benefit, i.e. conversions or relationships, is kind of still trying to be figured out. So, you know, voice assistants are everywhere. I think it's 1 in 5 UK homes have a voice assistant, a smart speaker. All of our phones nowadays have an assistant on them. And once I always remember 54% of voice assistant owners already use that voice assistant every single day. So huge usage, but typically those things are for kind of day-to-day help or queries. They're not necessarily yet translating into shopping as much as expected. I know that there was so much hype around voice search and voice shopping, and I think it's just being a bit slower to be realised than originally predicted. That I think ComScore, you know, that the very famous stat about voice search that is always quoted is 50% of searches will be by voice by the end of 2020. Now we're in 2020 and we're certainly not near 50% of searches being by voice, but it is going to have a huge impact on PPC less so, but on SEO especially. You know, you're going to need to optimize for natural language. It's not going to be about keywords. It's about, you know, if I'm asking Alexa, I'd say, what's the weather in London like today? If I'm typing that into Google, I would just have London weather. Oh gosh, Alexa's responding now. But yeah, and I think again, there's been a boom of actions and skills to support shopping and relationships, but you know, really, we don't see many clients yet that are seeing huge traction there or commercial gains from investing in a skill or an action. But I do think in the next decade, that will become a game changer.
Absolutely. It's funny that Alexa joined us then for that bit of interview.
I mean, I do have them in all my rooms. I'm one of those, but I don't really. I might add things to my shopping basket, but I don't really use it to engage with brands at this moment.
No, most of my use is for timers, turning lights on and off, and
Music,
setting
of
an alarm.
course.
Yeah, music, absolutely. Always the music. So I think one of the benefits of being a consultant is that you get to see a lot of organizations, you get to see the decisions being made. And I think this does put you, although this question feels very mean to ask it, does put you in a good position to answer this question. If you were a CMO, what trends would you be getting on board with at the moment? Where would you be trying to put some money and invest in?
I think it's a very fair question. I think you're right. I'm in a good position to ask it, be asked it. But I would also counter, for me, it entirely would depend on the business I was a CMO for.
Yep.
But if I kind of answer this question in terms of what technology trends and channel trends am I most interested in, or where I think there's a huge potential, I mean, to have gotten this far without even mentioning AI is quite miraculous, that's for sure. Certainly, AI is all about processing that big data that everyone has nowadays, analysing it, developing it and acting upon it. But critically, the AI element is that it's doing it on its own. And so, if you think about that in a marketing environment, in theory, that means personalisation, predictive analytics, segmentation, conversational bots, all at scale. And if you think about the potential in marketing effectiveness, but also in efficiencies that are to be had there, it is huge. Every marketer is trying to live by that, right message at the right time, at the right channel, all of that good stuff. In theory, AI, if it's harnessed in the right way, can help you deliver that with, minimal input. Of course, you need to manage and optimize, but, AI is all about self-learning and doing these things without any kind of manipulation. So at the moment, it's being used. Netflix and YouTube are very public about their investment in AI. And if you think about YouTube are claiming that 70% of their users' watches are driven by their AI recommendations. So, we're seeing some of it being realized now, but it's not really something that is kind of adopted in the mainstream. It takes a lot of investment, a lot of expertise. You have to have your data and your infrastructures in a place that means you can exploit AI. So I think that's something that we're only going to see grow over the next decade. I would, if I was a CMO, be looking into, well, what does that mean for my business? Voice, especially, like I mentioned, but also I think messaging apps. So many people are using WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. You see in Asia how huge WeChat is. And I think if a brand can ultimately harness those messaging apps to deliver one-to-one communications, then that's a huge, huge opportunity.
Yeah.
Facebook already claim that people use Facebook Messenger to communicate with a brand. I think they say 61% of daily messaging users have contacted a brand in the last 3 months. So there is some willingness there for consumers to use messaging apps to have communications with brands. At the moment, I'm seeing it mainly being used for support. So, for example, Zara's help is through WhatsApp. But I do think in the next decade, how will that become the new kind of form of having an email or an SMS? Will that be that next route to customer communications? Quite potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of brings together a number of trends you've already talked around conversational marketing and also the use of AI, but also having that customer data platform as well that connects all of those channels and messaging apps together into a single experience. Okay. Any other trends that you'd be wanting to jump on board with? I mean, those are some pretty important ones you've already mentioned.
Well, I mean, I think I've been spending quite a bit of time in this kind of self-isolating world, thinking about what does this mean? And beyond kind of just digital marketing, tech and channels, you've got to think about, what about my operating model? is drone delivery going to be taking off? How will I manage that? Will subscription models continue to rise because you want something consistently delivered to you? I've seen, how many invitations have you seen for the new house party app now? Everyone, if people are going to, I'm not saying the next decade everyone's going to be isolating, of course not, but you've got to think that in times like this, you're really challenged to think of how am I running as efficiently and effectively as possible, and how am I reaching my customers in a meaningful way. And so I think we're only going to see new trends off the back of this kind of coronavirus pandemic, that I think will potentially influence what we're doing in the years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. Like this interview itself is only happening as a result of coronavirus and
Exactly.
our response to that, and our desire and need to kind of get this content out to our clients and prospects. What advice would you give then to someone who's kind of sat at home, they're a marketing leader or a technology leader, and they're trying to work out, like, what's my forward strategy for the next 5 years? What advice would you give them, Faye?
I always say that you have to start with your business objective and your customer needs. So what are you as a business trying to achieve? But also, what experience pain points are you trying to alleviate? What is the need there, or the gap? And not just looking in today's world, but trying to plan that out for the next few years. When you're trying to consider what trends should I potentially follow, that's not typically an in-year decision. You've got to think about, what am I trying to do as a business in the next few years, and what will my customers be expecting from me in the next few years? And I think you have to really ask yourself, kind of, do I understand my customers, and therefore what those opportunities are? So really harness the data and insight that you can have within your business, but also within your industry, within your market, and try and quantify that so you can really understand what is the potential value to be gained here by adopting a new technology or trialing a new way of working or a new channel.
Yeah.
And I mentioned it at the start as well, you've got to think about, are you viewed as a forward-thinking brand? Apologies, I've got some background noise going on now.
Sounds like the bins are being taken out.
It is the bins being taken.
It's
such a glorious day. I've got my window open. I didn't think about that.
We've managed 25 minutes of interview now, and this is, like, other than Alexa jumping in earlier, this is our first attempt, so I'm happy with that. But so you were saying it's about working out what's the value of pursuing this trend to both the business but also to the customer, right?
Yes, absolutely.
That's the crucial assessment factor. What if you're not sure of that? Is there still room to innovate and to try some things that are a little riskier? And
I'm going to shut my window.
Fair enough.
Sorry.
All right, it's a beautiful day outside. It seems a shame. So I was asking the question then. So if the key thing is to assess what's the value for the customer, but also for the business. What if we can't assess that value? Is there still room for doing innovation and R&D stuff to kind of assess these trends?
Absolutely. I think if you want to kind of take that stance where you want to try a bit of an early adapter because the potential benefits are huge, of course, you have to accept that the risks are also huge. And I think you have to, as a business, say, this is what I'm willing to put at risk to assess and test a new technology or a new whatever it might be. And I think it's always important for businesses to have that kind of pot of money where they're willing to take risks with, because that's really ultimately how you learn and grow and potentially have a competitor edge, because you're trialing it before your competitors.
Yeah, absolutely. Because these things may take off and may be the next big thing. Absolutely. So, Faye, what I'm taking from this is we're going to send you some Snapchat goggles to do some R&D on, and you can let us know whether there's business value in those. Thank you very much for kind of going through these questions. Is there anything else you wanted to close off with, or?
No, I think really my what I would encourage digital marketers to do at this, especially at this time right now, is to take a moment to kind of really reflect on, what am I trying to achieve? what are my gaps,
Yep.
and therefore just making sure you stay on top of all the research that's out there, follow these proof of concept tests, make sure you keep an eye on what other people are doing with these new technologies, and that really kind of provides that inspiration, but also that vision for what you could be doing in the next digital decade.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice, particularly as we're all kind of locked down at the moment, is to be staying on top of what trends are out there and what new things are coming along. Now's a good time to really do some kind of horizon scanning and working out what's next for your business. Thank you very much, Faye, for going through this interview with me. We will publish this on the blog, and our next interview will be with John Eade, who is our Director of Managed Services at CACI, and he's going to be talking more specifically about technology and platform trends that are coming in the next decade. So thank you.
Thank you.